Um, I want to move forward because this is, I think, really important to understand the conclusion of the revolution in the South. You've got a really powerful anti-slavery movement beginning in the North, and we can exaggerate it a lot because we look for its origins when we teach about this period. But you look at Hamilton and John Jay and Benjamin Franklin. These people are very active in abolition circles in the North. Now they tend, by 19th century standards, to be moderate abolitionists. They're looking forward to the gradual abolition of slavery in most cases, prudent compromises which will lead to the end of slavery. And there are modern scholars who argue that when slavery was discussed in the Constitutional Convention, and it kept coming up in different ways, that a large number of the most active members, the most intellectually aware members of the Constitutional Convention, were convinced that the abolition of the slave trade was the key compromise that would lead to the gradual abolition of slavery. Now, we know that that didn't happen. But slavery isn't mentioned. Slaves aren't mentioned by name at any point in the U.S. Constitution, which suggests to me that everybody present agreed that the institution was not something that they wanted to embed in the fundamental.
Well, I think you're right, and actually there were, in this case, the South Carolina delegation, who were amongst the most active, were pretty bold in their statements. If you mess with slavery, you can have the Union without us.
And I think even Hamilton and Franklin and others, they recognized that there was absolutely no way to forge, even if they'd wanted to do it, and I think some of them did, want to forge a constitution without slavery, that it was a dead letter, that the Union would not be formed without slavery. But how common do you think it was, this belief that if we end the slave trade, the slave population will, A, will decline, and B, slavery doesn't have much of a future in the South because the crops that we grow now being 1787, they're not really crops that we're going to grow in the future in what will become Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Missouri. That is, they don't have much future in the inland, and certainly rice doesn't have any future beyond where it's already being grown.
No. And they're pointing to Virginia. The failure, the decline of the tobacco and the Tidewater is maybe slavery. This is one of those things I think everybody's kind of hoping it's just going to die a natural death, if you will. And interestingly, one of the tensions that remained until that 1808 compromise in South Carolina was there were people in the backcountry after the Revolution, particularly Baptists, some Methodists, who were very strongly anti-slavery. The old Methodist discipline, until the 19th century, you couldn't be a Methodist clergyman and own slaves. And you had a few congregations in the backcountry saying they were anti-slavery. Anytime you mention that, the folks in the low country you press the hot button. I mean, it was the pamphlet warfare that went on between the two parts of South Carolina until 1808 were pretty, well, they make for very interesting reading today, but they were, each one was talking about, are we going to go to war with each other over?
But there are people in the low country, big slave owners, who are prepared to go along with the abolition of the slave trade. Why?
The Great Compromise, you've also got the 2/3.
Well, you do get their vote. You get to count them for the purpose of enumeration.
Well, yes, and as you well know, the irony with people like Mr. Gary from Massachusetts talking about, well, if you can count your slaves, why can't we count our cows and mules? Which was not a very nice thing, but that was this. the South got to and in this case, it really, Virginia's part of it because they're going to benefit from the 2/3 rule, but where you count an enslaved person as 2/3 of a person for representation in the House. But it's really going to benefit, South Carolina benefits more than anybody else because of their overwhelming black
That's
population.
true. That's true. Do the Low Country planters, are they prepared to go along with the abolition of the slave trade because they already have such a large slave population, and it will in fact increase the value of their slave property?
No.
If you close off the incoming supply.
That didn't really enter into it. Well, of course, it's an 1807 deadline. They've got a certain number of years to bring slaves in. And one of the things that got South Carolina into economic trouble in the 1790s is after having lost 25% of the slave population to the British, either through being hauled off or they just disappeared, maybe into Spanish
Right.
Florida, planters went, oh, I had 200 slaves before the Revolution. I need 200 now. So they buy them on credit, and then the world economy goes into a dip, and South Carolina's economy tanks. But there was that mindset, and of course, after 1807, Virginia planters make a lot of money selling their slaves down south. But that's an after the fact look at it.
They do, but what the difference that puzzles me about the Upper South and the Lower South, the Virginians, the Marylanders, they recognize that the economic world that they've lived in before the Revolution is coming to an end. At least the intelligent ones do, like Washington, and they're looking forward to a different way of making a living. And so Washington is much more interested in economic diversification. He's interested in harnessing the Great Falls of the Potomac to the water wheels of the Industrial Revolution. He's interested in developing canals for trade. He's interested in crop diversification. And it seems to me, now I'm an outsider to South Carolina history, that the South Carolina grandees they're comfortable with what they're doing. What do they imagine the future is going to be? What is South Carolina going to be like in 50 years? I mean, Washington has a vision of Virginia, what it might be, and it doesn't become what he hopes, but what Virginia would be in 1830 or 1840. Do South Carolina leaders of the Revolution have a vision of the future of South Carolina?
Not
in the same way.
Not in the same way. You obviously have some individuals, and if you trace Washington's tour in the 1790s, he will mention certain South Carolina, or wherever he goes, who is a scientific farmer.
Right.
And there are some, but South Carolina chooses pretty much the agricultural model, very anti-business, never had an incorporation law until after the Civil War.
That's amazing.
And even though it becomes the leading cotton state in 1820, all the cotton shipped to New England to be made into cloth and then shipped back down south.